Welcome to this first episode of CCC Conversations, a commemoration of 15 years of competition enforcement in the CARICOM single market and economy. We're here today with Professor Emeritus Eleanor Fox, well-known expert in competition law and author in the field. Professor Fox, welcome and thank you for speaking with us today.
Hello and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, can you tell us about the different ways cross-border competition law can be enforced, in particular, the option you see as the most effective or can offer the most benefits for the CSME?
Yes, so I think cross-border enforcement is critical. And that is because, as a practical matter, and especially today, you get so many cross-border cartels, and the cartels are virtually always raising the price, very often of necessities. And if they can get away with it, it means the people pay almost twice as much as they should have to pay for these necessities. So that means cross-border, it means all cartels, but cross-border cartels should be detected. And regional organizations are better positioned to detect cross-border cartels. National agencies might not even see them. They might be outside of the radar screen of the national agency. But when the national agencies coordinate and cooperate with one another, and they observe prices have gotten high and they've gotten too high, and it seems to be unexplained by natural scarcities, something's wrong. It's probably a cartel. And to collaborate with their neighbors to ask if they are experiencing the same problem, and then getting to the root of it, which is probably a cartel, is very, very important. The other important point here, which only makes things more difficult, is it might not be just a private party cartel. There might be governments themselves that are complicit. And they might be using anti-competitive trade rules to put up barriers, which are usually procured by the vested interests that want the barriers to protect their monopolies. This is a really big area that regional organizations are exploring. It may be that the member state that has put up the anti-competitive barrier has violated the free movement law of the regional, and you have a very good framework under your treaty for condemning undue state restraints that are really protectionist and that are really protecting the national markets. That's one of the most important jobs of the trade side of the treaty.
Yes.
So I very much suggest that the competition people and section be in close touch with the free movement people and section to identify where there are cartels or suspicious movements and non-movements of goods across the borders, and work together, find out what is the problem. If it's a competition problem, you enforce. If it's a trade problem, they enforce. If it's some combination, you figure out how you're going to enforce against it.
And talk about the relationship between competition and consumer protection and trade. I know you sort of touched on at the beginning of this talk between competition and trade and how they can complement each other and the differences but complementary role of each other. But I'd just like to throw consumer protection in the mix and get your views on that as well.
Yes, I think it's very good that you have also the authority to do consumer protection work. And there are a lot of problems that span competition, consumer protection, and trade. And so I would say that one of the problems that so clearly spans competition and consumer protection today are the problems emanating from the digital markets and the abuse of power of the big gatekeeper digital firms. And it's hard when the competition is separated from consumer protection, because some of those big problems that we're seeing coming out of behavior of the big tech gatekeepers is at least as much a consumer deception problem as it is as a competition harm problem. If you deal together with problems that are so integrated, you are certainly more efficient and better off.
Just want to touch a little bit before we sort of close on sector regulation and competition law. So, for example, some national competition enforcement frameworks in CARICOM provide for some exemptions of sectors, economic sectors, for example, banking and public utilities from the competition law. Do you think, is there any benefit to competition authorities in collaborating with national sector regulators, even though the law may have a carve-out or an exemption?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm not happy that you have so many exemptions. I think usually exemptions are not the best way to go, and that often it is the competition authority that will be more perceptive about restraints that don't have to happen in the name of efficiency. And the sector regulator will be more protective of those within the sector regulator's fold. I think whether it's a merger or an agreement, I think that there's a big role for the competition authority to come in and be heard. Even if there's an exemption, there's still a big role for the competition authority to do advocacy and to say, look, this is very anti-competitive and you really should not let it happen.
Just, a final thought here as we think about 15 years of the CARICOM Competition Commission and the regions, the CSME's commitment to regional competition enforcement in strengthening the single market and economy that they want to build. What would be your advice to the CARICOM on the future of competition enforcement in the next 15 years?
So let's even expand your question to be not just enforcement, but policy. So what is CARICOM's role in the next 15 years? And by expanding it, I also want to bring in the role of CARICOM in maybe harmonizing the national laws and getting a more seamless working system within your region. So CARICOM has a lot of challenges. And I think, let me start a kind of roots up problem and question that I think you should always pose to yourself, and I think national authorities ought to also. And that is, what are you seeing out there in markets that looks wrong? Like prices are too high. You're seeing prices of certain foods way too high. And what is causing or supporting this problem? Or you even know barriers are too high. Maybe there is a monopsony board or a monopoly board somewhere. But looking around and saying, what's wrong regarding markets, that we would be in a position either to try to cure or to give publicity to it so the governments can try to cure. And then, in other words, focusing on the problems that need to be solved and how to solve them. So for some of these, it's going to be state barriers that you might want to advocate against. They are all over the lot. Many state barriers. It could be licensing barriers that don't let the people who are well-positioned, meritorious get into the market. It might be all sorts of things that the World Bank, for example, will look at and say, what's wrong with this market and what can we do about it? So that's number one, to look at what has gone wrong that better working markets can correct, and then how do you attack it? All right, second, put a price tag out there, more publicity about the harms to competition so that the people understand there are real harms to competition, and if you can only get rid of them, they will be much better off. The European Union, for example, put big price tags out, which it called the costs of non-Europe. They had studies done about how prices were way too high and services too scarce because of certain barriers. And so that always galvanizes attention. On the enforcement side, and then I'll come to the policy, maybe harmonization side. On the enforcement side, I think that you want to be sure, if you can, to get really strong tools for enforcement, to get people on board with the enforcement. That was the gist of my first remarks, get people on board with it. But then you've got to have tough enforcement actions that you win and you have a big penalty so that it is deterrent. And until you get a handful of such cases, like South Africa did with its bread cartel case, where it showed how much the poor people were paying for bread and they shouldn't have had to pay it. And you get particular examples and show you might need more tools, the ability to enforce and the remedy set that will deter. That's what you're going to really need to do to get people pay attention. That's a hard job because I know there are a lot of politics concerned about, whether member states are even on board. So, all right, now let's talk about relationship to member states. You have a really hard job there with only 4 countries that have competition laws, and even they are not totally harmonized. Then you have a number of countries, more than 10, or about 10, not quite, that don't have the competition laws. And I know you're trying to get them to enact their laws. And then what will the laws say, and how close will they be to the center's law? I looked at the treaty's statement of the law in this area, and it's very good. And to the extent that you can get interpretations of your member state laws, it's at least very compatible with the wording of your own law and the application of your own law, you're better off. I wouldn't worry so much that even among those 4 countries that have laws, they have some different wording about object and effect and the extent to which they talk about harms to competition. I think that working with that and bringing them together and having meetings on substantive problems so that they think, here are the facts that happened. Is it anti-competitive? How do you determine it's anti-competitive? Should it be prohibited? And then how do you interpret and apply your law to prohibit it if the answer is yes, it should be. So I think getting common minds consensus on application is one of your roles, and something that if you do that well, you will have succeeded.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Fox. You have given us so much food for thought to think about, key insights for the region, for the CCC, for the national competition authorities, for the member states. We're really glad to have caught you to have a few minutes chat with us on this critical area for regional integration in the CSME. Thank you so much, Eleanor.
You are very welcome, Mark. My pleasure. Good luck to you. You're a great team and you've been producing great work product. So I look forward to more of it. Thank you.
All right, great. Take care.